Joe, when you started making Intent to Destroy, what was the question you were trying to answer?
You know, for years I've been fascinated by the Armenian genocide and the fact that it's contested history, because to me the evidence is kind of overwhelming. And I was actually approached about making the film, and initially I was not interested in actually making it because I didn't see a way to do it that would transcend just talking heads and archival footage. And then when I heard the promise was being made, I thought that was a real opportunity to do something different as a filmmaker, but also to really add to the dialogue that's already out there about the Armenian genocide, because by going behind the scenes of the promise and using that as the present tense thread, it allowed me to make a film about denial and the aftermath of denial and the mechanism of denial. And those are the questions I wanted to address in this film. Of course, part of the film is to also tell the underlying history of the genocide, because it's history that, sadly, a lot of Americans, a lot of people all over the world actually are unfamiliar with because of the successful attempt to kind of shove that story under the rug of history. But the ability to actually do it in a way that's cinematically satisfying so that we can transcend talking heads and archival footage by going behind the scenes of a movie, a feature film, that was exciting to me because I wanted to talk about the denial aspect. And going behind the scenes of a big budget Hollywood movie is not just a gratuitous device, it's central to this story, which is why I thought there was an opportunity. The opportunity to go behind the scenes of the promise, to me, represented a real, not just a great filmmaking device to allow me as a present tense cinema verite filmmaker, which is what I'm more comfortable with. It gives me a present tense device to hang everything on. But I knew when I heard the promise was announced that it actually represented a historical moment, because over the years, anytime Hollywood has attempted to make a movie that's Armenian genocide themed, the US State Department gets a complaint from Turkey. They call the Hollywood studio, and they've convinced over the years Hollywood not to tackle this story. Like as early as 1935, Irving Thalberg at MGM was bringing the book 40 Days of Musadat to life, to the screen. And in pre-production, that movie was actually shut down because the Turks complained to the State Department, and the State Department convinced MGM it wouldn't be in their interest to make that movie. So America has aided and abetted the denial of this story. And one of the methods that has happened is in Hollywood itself, where it's been almost taboo to make big budget movies about this incredible historical event. America has basically aided and abetted the denial of this story, and one of the ways they've done it is by encouraging Hollywood not to tell these stories. That would be kind of like pulling Steven Spielberg aside and saying, "Hey, don't make Schindler's List. We need to keep the Germans happy." But that's what's going on with the Armenian genocide. So you've never seen, a big budget or even a small budget Hollywood. You've seen other filmmakers outside of the U.S. studio system tackle this, but you've never seen a mainstream Hollywood movie about the Armenian genocide. So when I heard the promise was being made, which didn't come from a studio, it's still private money, but it was involving a lot of Hollywood players, Christian Bale, Oscar Isaac from the acting standpoint, Mike Medavoy, major Hollywood producer involved, Ralph Winter. When I saw that this film was being made, I thought to myself, and then pitched the producers of The Promise, that allowing me on set would be an amazing device, both cinematically for me to tell a present tense unfolding story to then hang all the history on, which to me, just as a filmmaker, is a more interesting way to tell a historical story. But it's also, that story is very much connected to the story of denial, because movies have been repressed. When Adam Agoyan, as you see in the film, in Canada even, made Ararat, which is an Armenian genocide themed film, he received threats to not make the film. So there have been all sorts of examples where artists have been, threatened or encouraged not to make their films, and Hollywood itself has just avoided this subject. So for me, as a filmmaker, when I heard The Promise was being made, it felt like a great opportunity to, do something that was both cinematically satisfying for myself, so I could follow a real story as it's unfolding, which is the style of filmmaking I prefer, but also it allowed me to move away from just telling the story of the facts of the genocide, which a more historical approach would allow me to do, or would only allow me to do, and instead to tell the larger story, to me, of the last 100 years of denial and how denial works, the aftermath of denial.
So this film was possible because of Mr. Krikorian's generous donation, and it was made outside the system, and that's why it's now finally, this story is out there?
Right, The Promise was made outside the studio system. Krikorian wanted a film about the Armenian genocide to be made. The project was greenlit and developed while he was still alive. Then he passed, but the money was in place to make The Promise. And so even though there's, it feels like a Hollywood movie, and many people in Hollywood worked on it, it's not a product of the studio system, which allowed it to be made. And so the fact that a big budget indie film on this subject, on the subject of the Armenian genocide, was being made, allowed me to come in as a documentarian and tell the larger story, not just of the genocide, but also the story of denial and how denial works. Even subtle forms of denial. The US State Department saying, hey, it's in our interest, don't make that movie, which to me is morally repugnant. We give lots of money to Turkey as, in the form of aid. Do we really think that by allowing our artists to have freedom of expression, allowing studios to make whatever movie they want to make, will interfere with why we have an alliance with Turkey? And why we have an alliance with Turkey, in part, is their strategic importance. Their strategic location below Russia and above the Middle East has been an important factor in all of our, first during the Cold War, being able to have military bases there so that we can have listening posts, so we can have bombing missions into the Middle East during the Iraq wars. So we want to keep this ally happy, which I don't disagree with, but at what moral price when it goes so far as to not acknowledge a genocide?
What's the secret to finding truth when making a documentary? Is there anything that you say or do that helps you find it?
We could spend hours and hours and talk about truth in documentaries, because I'm a firm believer that all documentary filmmaking, all media, is inherently subjective. You shoot hundreds of hours of footage, only a couple of hours ends up in your final film. There are days you're not there to cover a story. You choose a camera angle. Every camera angle communicates a different emotion, potentially. You make thousands of editorial decisions. So what's guided me is that I am not looking for the capital truth, capital T truth of a situation, because I think truth is very elusive and subjective, depending on from what point of view you're looking at it from. What I look for in my films is an emotional truthfulness about the human condition or the subject that you're looking at. In Paradise Lost, it becomes clear these guys were railroaded, but a different filmmaker would have possibly made a different film. So I think filmmakers who think that they're presenting the absolute truth about a particular subject, I have potential, certain kinds of films, straightforward history, I think it's more, hitting the truth, whatever that means, is possible. But what I'm looking for are the emotional truthfulness of a situation. The truth rises to the top if you allow both sides to have their say, treat the audience like a jury, and not pound a specific message over people's heads. It has always been the method that I've preferred. Even in this film, even though it's a film about denial and genocide, there's a section of the film in which those who don't believe the genocide took place, they're given a chance to air their views, and we allow The audience, we allow the audience to make up their own minds about it. So to me, that's what I mean by emotional truthfulness. You air all sides of an issue. Don't pound a message over the viewer's head, and you let the truth rise to the top. In Crude, some people were surprised that I allowed the executives from Chevron to give it, to be interviewed and to present their point of view about the case. But I think I trust the audience to come to the right conclusion about the emotional truthfulness of the situation. And sometimes the emotional truthfulness of a situation is not necessarily what you think the film is about. For example, in Crude, the indigenous rainforest dwellers of Ecuador and their American lawyers were, making a case and suing Chevron for creating this cancer death zone the size of Rhode Island through bad drilling practices. Chevron was claiming that that's not the case, and the pollution that's there is the responsibility of the state oil company. Some people may think that I was making a film about the absolute truth of that situation. For me, the absolute truth of the situation, the emotional truth of the situation that I was trying to talk about is that we are destroying the rainforest, that the people who, most deserve to be treated well were being treated horribly, and that there was a whole other set of reasons I was making that film, to bring justice to these people. So sometimes the subjective truth of a situation is not always what the filmmaker is necessarily trying to present. At least that's how I look at it.
Well, you've covered so many niches, from Metallica and therapy, the West Memphis Three, Tony Robbins, Whitey Bulger. At this stage of your career, how do you know when you want to invest time and money into a story? What is it about a story that okay, this is something I want to commit several years and maybe even a lifetime to dealing with?
I've been lucky enough to really cover a wide range of material and to make quite a few films. Somehow they keep letting me do it. The strange thing is that, sometimes, instead of me choosing the subject kind of chooses me at a period in my life where I feel like, there's something I need to learn, For Tony Robbins, I was open to that kind of thinking for the first time in my life. And it's a very positive film because Tony had a very positive impact on my life, and I wanted to share that with other people. Some people looked at that film and were waiting for the third act shoe to drop where I rip him to shreds and show why what he's doing is a bad thing, but that wasn't my intention. With Metallica, there was a whole other set of reasons in my life why that film came to me. So when I look back, in some ways, a lot of the times, the subject that I need to learn about at that moment seems to be my guiding principle, as odd as that sounds. But it's not just a passive thing either. Obviously, I choose the films that I want to make, and generally I look for opportunities where, by focusing on the plight of a particular individual, it shines a light on a larger aspect of the human condition. I think film is an incredible medium for social change. I mean, I've had the good fortune where much of my work has had a direct impact on a case or a situation. And so I'm always, if I can, whether it's my, I just finished a couple of recent television series, one for Spike it's called Gone, The Forgotten Women of Ohio, where the mothers of these dead and missing prostitutes were feeling like nobody cared about their situation, nobody cared about solving the crimes of against these women because they were prostitutes and drug abusers. And I felt like, look, everyone deserves justice regardless of your lifestyle. And so I looked into that case and was compelled to try to help and provide some answers. So I always look for, and I felt I could actually make a difference. Some stories are presented to me where I feel like I can't get the access or whatever, but it's a strange group of criteria that make me feel like this is the right thing. And then at the most basic level, is this a situation, or are these people that I want to spend 2.5 years with, because that's the arc of a film. Excuse me. And even if it's an ugly story, that's, whether it's a pleasant story or an ugly story, that's not the deciding factor of do I want to spend 2.5 years. It's who are these people? Can I make an impact? Can I be successful in my filmmaking mission? And those are kind of the factors as to whether or not you want to spend 2.5 years of your life doing something. So,
What was the documentary that made you want to be a documentary filmmaker?
interesting. A number of films, I think, really had an impact on me while deciding to be a filmmaker. I think the film that most impacted me was Titty-Cut Follies by Frederick Wiseman. An unfiltered view into this mental institution and the kind of access that today is almost, access and a complete lack of awareness amongst people that they were being filmed, which I think we achieved in Brothers Keeper. I think the people in Brothers Keeper, the brothers, didn't really understand what a film meant, and so we got really unfiltered reality. And that's what I felt in Titty-Cut Follies. It's just this incredible immersion into a world that you may not think you want to go, but by going into that world and taking that journey that the film offers, it drops you on the other side as a changed person, because it makes you think so deeply about your own life and life in general. And to me, that's the mission of a documentary. You want to take somebody into a world that they may not even think they want to go or care to go, take them on an intellectual and emotional journey, and when the film is over, you have had like some profound moments of reflection that really deeply affect your life. And that's how I felt when I saw Titty-Cut Follies. The other film that was incredibly influential to me was Thin Blue Line. I was not a filmmaker yet, and seeing Thin Blue Line at a cinema with the Miramax logo, thinking, wow, this is a documentary made for the theatrical audience. That really spoke deeply to me, because I loved movies, I loved the theatrical experience, but that was the film that made me think, okay, I want to make movies, documentary movies, in a cinema, for the cinema, for a theatrical audience, which of course these days that's harder and harder to come by, and we can talk about the impact of streaming and all that, but Brothers Keeper was an attempt to make a film for theatrical audiences at a time that the theatrical documentary was quite a rare breed. And so I think Thin Blue Line really, Titty-Cut Follies made me realize what I wanted to do in film, and Thin Blue Line kind of made me feel like the venue for this kind of filmmaking is the theatrical setting. And of course, the fact that Thin Blue Line led to the release of somebody wrongfully convicted also was deeply inspiring for what I ended up doing with, my films. So those are two. There are many others. John Cassavetes, actually, I would say, is an even bigger influence, because I love what Cassavetes did with scripted material, what I feel we do with unscripted material, kind of the inverse, like just, Cassavetes would make you feel like you're watching something incredibly authentic, but it's a movie, and I feel like what we attempt to do with this style of documentary making is to tell a very truthful story, but to do it in a cinematic way that feels like a piece of cinema.